Okay, so we're continuing with the next Mishnah. Pirkei Avos, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Yud Gimel. We have quite a complex Mishnah just by the language. We're still talking in Hillel. There are three statements of Hillel. We're now in the middle one. Hu haya omer, naged shema, avad shemei. That's statement number one. Udelo mosif yasef. That's statement number two. Udelo yalef katala chayav. That's statement number three. Ude ishtamesh betaga chalaf. I'm going to just give a simple translation just to get clarity on the matter, but we'll still be full of questions that we'll need to clarify. So just a simple translation. Hu haya omer, Hillel would say, naged shema. So literally, it's hard to translate literally, but when we get into interpretation more, we'll get more clarity on it. But there are different interpretations of what naged means. But let's just say one that goes against the name loses his name. Udelo mosif yasaif, and someone who doesn't add, then from the lashon of saif, he'll be cut off. He'll be killed. Udelo yalef, and someone who doesn't teach, katala chayav is chayav misa. Ude ishtamesh betaga, and someone who uses the crown, chalaf, will be passed. Chalipin, we passed, or we bypassed. So let's start with some basic questions on this Mishnah. Question number one, why is it in Aramaic? The rest of Pirkei Avos seems to do very well in Hebrew. Why did Hillel Zaken over here make our lives challenging and write the phrases in Aramaic? Question number two, there are four separate statements here. Whenever the Mishnah says different things in one topic, they're connected in some way. There's maybe a progression or there's one underlying theme. What is the connection or the theme or the progression behind these four statements? It's simple shot. What do they mean? That's obviously a basic question. Now, if we're going into more detail, is if you notice that it says Nagad Shema Avad Shmei. So the first time it says the word name with an aleph, the second time with a hey. Is it talking about name and name? Or does it mean two separate things? Okay, let's start and we'll see if we can get an understanding of this in more depth to get a flow of what we're talking about here. So the Meforshim write that the word naged here is similar to the word good asik or good achik, good asik or good achit, which Rashi there says that the word good means to draw. So you draw Shama, the name. Someone who's drawing the name, Avad Shmei, will lose his name. There are two different names taking place here. The first Aramaic word is the name, and the second word is Shmei, his name. So what name is someone drawing? What does it mean to draw a name? And why, when he draws the name, is he losing his name? That's just a simple understanding of what's going on. So this idea, I must be honest with you, when I was reading it beforehand, I was sitting in a room by myself, and I burst out laughing out loud when I thought of what this means, because it's funny, but it's sad, but it's very true. There's a certain natural level. What I'm quoting now comes from Drosha Saran on the first Drosha. There's a certain natural level which a person is at. And the Ran writes that the nature of man, nature always returns to its natural place. And he gives two examples. He says, if you put air underwater, the air will naturally rise. He says, if you put earth in the air and you let go, it will naturally fall down. Meaning the Hashem designs nature in a way that it will go back to its natural place. And if you put something which is not in its natural place, then it won't be able to remain there. And not only will it not be able to remain there, but the Gemara in Sota, Daf Tes, says that if a person tries to grab onto something that is not his, not only will he not get that thing, but he'll also lose what he had until then. That phrase in Sota Daf Tes is going to be our guide to understand this. The word naged means to draw down a name, meaning we're talking about someone who that's not his natural level. But he decided, he made it an agenda that he wants his name to go out in the world. He wants to be famous, he wants to be known, he wants to have a good reputation. But that name is not his name. It doesn't start off by saying Nagad Shmei. He's drawing down his name. He's drawing down some other name. He's making up a name for himself and drawing it down. What will happen if a person tries to determine for himself a name? And this is what I was laughing at, but also finding quite sad at the same time. when a person tries to make an image of themselves to be someone who they're not authentically, I mean, they try to acquire a name for themselves, but they're doing it not by authentically building that name, then everyone else in the world recognizes how fake it is. And only they are fooled and blinded by the fact that they've got this name. So let's give an example of how that happens. Someone does something of somewhat note. They build something, they paint something, they say a chidush, and it's not such a great chidush. It's not so they don't get such positive feedback. People aren't bowing down to them, let's say, based on that chidush that they just said. So now they realize, I'm going to lose my name. Which name? The name that I imagine that I have. I'm going to lose this name. So then I make sure that those people know, did you hear that chidush? Did you hear how good it was? Recognize it. You don't hear, other people don't say chidushim like this. You believe me, if you would go to other places and listen to other people, you wouldn't hear such things. You should know this is an amazing chidush. Did you hear how good it was? So now the people who are listening, they're not sure what to do because they know from themselves that it's not an authentic building, it's not a great painting, it's not a great chidush, but they feel a bit awkward because he's demanding that they recognize it. They say, okay, yes, great chidush. And he goes, you see, it paid off that I showed him. And now what's happening right there? So now those people, not only are they not respecting him on the level that he pertains to be, that he pretends to be, they're not even respecting him on the level that he authentically is. So that's pshat in the Mishnah. Hu Ayaomer, Hillel would say, Naged Shema, if a person tries to draw down a name which is not authentically his name, not only will he not get that name, and whatever he pretends that he is, he won't be on that level, but Avad Shmei, his name, even his authentic name, where the level where he genuinely is, he'll even lose that. That's what the Gemara in Sota says, that's what the Ran says, and that's a beautiful pshat in the Mishnah. And that's why I was laughing, because when you see people like that, everyone else around them notices that. And everyone can see it. And all the people who come into interaction with them are playing along and saying, yeah, good one, very good, good. I know he needs this ego boost. But they're not doing it because they kind of pity him. They don't look up to him. They think he's pathetic. But okay, you know, he asked for it, so why not? I'll give it to him. Avad Shmei, he even loses his own authentic name. That's pathetic. So that's the point number 1 in the Mishnah. Point number 2 in the Mishnah. Udulo mosif yasef. So I saw 2 interpretations here which connected. I like the concept behind them. The one is referring to someone who's not learning Torah. Udulo mosif, if someone doesn't continuously learn Torah, yasef, he'll be cut off. So I'm going to explain now on a pshat level, but at the end we're going to draw it all together, connect all the points. But at a simple level, Torah is what gives us life. If a person is constantly learning Torah, then they have life. If they're not constantly learning Torah, then they're cut off from the source of life. So a person can't say, I've learned lots of Torah, I know a lot, I'm already safe. Like, mashallah mahadavadom. You go to university and you get a degree. You finish the degree. Now you have a certificate. You have a certificate. That means you're a baki in this topic. You never need to learn ever again that topic because you already have a certificate. And what will be if you forget everything you did in university the moment you get the certificate? It doesn't matter. You still have the certificate. You're safe. You're safe. You have the certificate. So that's in the non-Jewish world. Because in the non-Jewish world, the wisdom isn't for the sake of the wisdom. The wisdom is to have a profession and you have a certificate and you can put it on your wall behind you over there. And anyone who watches you on Zoom, they can see the certificate and they know, oh, he has a certificate, very good. What does he remember? I don't know. No one's tested him since then, but it doesn't matter. He has a certificate. Now in Torah is not like that. Torah is like a downwards escalator that you constantly have to be moving up. That if you pause for any moment, then the escalator starts going down. Why? Because it's life. It's air. It's water. It's something which is your constant connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like it says in Yirmiyah, we say in Davening and Yom Naraim, Elokim Chaim, meaning that if you're connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're alive. And if you're not constantly reconnecting, you're not alive. Mashallah ma'adavadom. If you have a phone and the phone has service, Sometimes you have better service, sometimes you have worse service. If you don't have any service at all, then you won't be able to speak to anyone. Your relationship with Hashem, sometimes you feel very connected. You feel very close. Sometimes you don't feel so close. And that happens. It varies. It does vary. It's very natural. Just like the sea, the tide goes up and goes down. It's like the mood wanes and it changes. It's natural then your relationship with Hashem, that like the connection on the phone will go up and will go down. But if you have no connection, then you're not alive. You're not connected. So therefore, the lomo, if you're not constantly including your Torah, Yasef, then you've cut off your source of life. You've cut off your relationship with Hashem. That's one very, very pshat, basic, obvious, true, couldn't be truer pshat. Another very nice interpretation that I saw, which I connected to and I liked it, was Udelo Mosif is not just referring to learning Torah, but it's referring to a method of learning Torah. When you learn Torah, then you learn a piece of information, and then another piece of information, and then another piece of information, and then another piece. Now, it's hard to remember all that information. It's a fact, and another fact, and another fact, and another fact. And by nature of lots and lots of information that comes to your mind, you will forget it after a time. However, if you see inner connections between everything that you've learned, that connects to this, now I've got a bigger picture, and this connects to this, now I've got an even bigger picture, and you start building a macro vision. You start building a meta view of how all the pieces of Torah connect together, then you won't forget all the details because they don't stand independently. I know this ever happened to you. When you're listening to a shiur and the rabbi is making a flow of logic. So if you understand the flow, then when you afterwards try to review, it's not so difficult because you understood the whole flow. So now you get to the end point and now you can go back over each stage and each stage. But if you didn't understand the flow and you're trying to remember, okay, in the first 10 minutes of the shir, the rabbi said that point. And then he went on to a different point. And then he said this point. And then he went to a different point. And he said that point. It's going to be very hard for you to remember all the points because you don't recognize how each point links and connects to the next. It's a disconnected feel. It's not a flow. That's the next chat. Udelo mosif. If you don't add, meaning not that you're adding more Torah, but you're adding the connections between the pieces. You're adding your understanding of how each piece connects to each other piece. Yasef, then you'll be cut off and you'll forget it. Because you'll forget the flow. It'll just be disconnected, not relevant pieces of information. That's a very nice pshat, which I like very much. There's one commentary that a lot of the commentators bring. His name is Ri Ben Shushan, or Sasson. Ri Ben Sasson. I'm not sure who he was, unfortunately, but a lot of them unfortunately quote him. So he was Kadum, and he's the one who said that pshat. Okay, part 3. At the end, we're going to connect all the pieces, but this is part 3 now. Udelo yalef katala chayev. If a person doesn't teach, then he's chayev misa. Now, what is the idea of teaching? So I saw, I'll quote a few ideas in this, but I saw just it says later on, it says halomed al manat lelamed. That musag, that concept, teaching, the way you are supposed to learn is learning with the mindset to teach. And Rabbi Ferber in his commentary on Pirkei Avos over there. Pirkei Avos with Rabbi Ferber. So he writes, it's a Rosh Tevis. The Gemara said, the pasuk says, Adam la'amal yulad. A man is made for toil. But the word amal is Rosh Tevis. Adam le'amal. Lamed ayin mem lamed Rosh Tevis. Lilmod al manat lelamed. I like that very much. Meaning, Adam, man, lilmod al manat lelamed, yulad. Man was created for learning Torah with the mindset of teaching it. So the next stage, well, I'm not saying stages yet, but the next piece is where it says, if you don't teach, you're chayav misa. So according to that gematria, or that Rosh Tevis that he said, it makes sense because your whole purpose of being born, Adam la'amal yulad, the whole purpose of being born wasn't just for your own learning. It was for learning for you to teach on to others. If you're not doing that, you don't have a right to exist. But Mashna, which we've said before, but it's worth repeating, in Eretz Yisrael, there are 2 seas, apart from the Mediterranean Sea. There's the Yam HaKinneret, and there's the Yam HaMelach. Now, the Yam HaKinneret is fresh water, and the Yam HaMelach is salty water. You can't drink it. What is the difference in nature? What is the reason in nature why the Kinneret has fresh water, but the Yam HaMelach doesn't have fresh water? And from a natural perspective, it's very straightforward. The Yam HaKinneret is part of the Jordan River. The Jordan River comes into Yama Kinneret, expands the whole sea, and then the Jordan River continues. Let's do that again. The Jordan River comes down, expands all the sea, and then it continues. That means you have intake and you have outtake. That's what causes fresh water. However, the Dead Sea is like a big container where the Jordan River ends there. All the water comes in. Where does it go? It doesn't have anywhere to go. So it evaporates. It evaporates. Then the water goes back to Shamayim, and all the salty aspect remains. Meaning, that's a message. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, as a mashal for us to learn this principle. The Yama Kinneret is a mashal for a Talmud Chacham who is not only learning his own Torah, but he's also teaching his Torah to others. When you have an intake that you're receiving tradition from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from your Rebbeim, you're doing your own learning, but you're also giving the Torah on to your students, to Talmidim, to your friends, then your own Torah is fresh, it's alive. It's called a chiyus. But when you're only receiving, you're just saying, I want, it's all for myself, but you're not giving it on to others, and that Torah dries up, becomes bitter, and it happens to be in the place where Sdom was, unfortunately. Okay, that's point number 2. And that also is a quote from Sota. Before we quoted Sota Daf Tes, now we're quoting Sota Daf Kaf Beis. On the right at the bottom of Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, it's dashing the pasuk. Rav Huna Amarav dashing the pasuk. Ki Ravabim Chalalim Mipila Vatsumim Kol Orgeya. So there's 2 parts. I'm just quoting the second part right now. What does it mean in the pasuk when it says Vatsumim Kol Orgeya? So the Chazal make a joshua. The word Atsumim is someone who's Otsem Einayim. He closes his eyes. I mean, he doesn't care about other people. Ze Talmud Chacham Shehigia Lahora'ah Ve'eino Mora. This is referring to a Talmud Chacham who he's learned Torah. He's closing his eyes and not teaching the Torah. And what does the pasuk say? Atsumim kol horogeya. It's like murdering. That fits in beautifully with the Pirkei Avos over here, which is that we're learning katla chayav, it's chayav misa, and that's what you see happens in a natural way in the Dead Sea. That what happens? It dies. And no fish can live there. Everything dies there. If you're only intake and there's no outtake. Now the last part, and then we're going to connect all the bits together, the sections together. U'de'ishtamish betaga. Someone who uses the crown, chalaf. Now the Meforshim here discuss what this crown is referring to, but interestingly, later on in Pirkei Avos in Perek Dalet, then Rav Tzadok, he darshans this statement of Hillel, and he says that it's referring to someone who takes credit for Torah. Mashal ma'adavadome, a person has to pay a fine, or he has to pay some payment, and he says, I'm a rabbi. Oh, rabbi, you're an exempt rabbi. Well, you don't have to pay. And then he uses the crown of Torah for his own benefit. There's a very interesting story in the Gemara in Nedarim of Rabbi Tarfon. This is tremendous midas chassidus. I don't think it applies to us. But Rabbi Tarfon was once taking hefka fruits, shmita fruits from a field, and the Baal HaSadah didn't realize the halacha, and he thought that Rabbi Tarfon was stealing. So he went up to Rabbi Tarfon and he grabbed him and he put him in a bag. And he was walking to the river with Rabbi Tarfon in the bag in order to throw him in the river and kill him. Quite a drastic measure. So Rabbi Tarfon shouted out and says, Oy le Tarfon! Woe to Tarfon that he's going to die. So the man heard him and he said, Tarfon, oy vavoy! He's a big Talmud Chacham, and he let him go free. And the Gemara there in Nedarim says that for the rest of his life, Rabbi Tarfon had tsar, that he used Torah, meaning his name, which represented Torah. Tarfon was a name that was known for the sake of Torah. He used the fact that he was Talmud Chacham. He didn't do it intentionally, but he used the Talmud Torah, and that saved his life. And that's definitely midas chassidus. If it ever happens to anyone here, that you can say you're a Talmud Chacham and they save your life because of that, certainly v'chai behem, you should definitely do it. Rabbi Tarfon was a chassid on that level. But either way, you see the principle that it's using Torah for your own benefit. I clearly remember when I was in Shana Bet, it was a boy the year below me, Shana Aleph, and we got on a hasa'ah, and I used to have these mini buses that would come 5 minutes before the Egged buses to chap people and take away all the business from Egged. And he got on, and he said, how much is it? And the guy said, it's a Yerushalayim, 15 shekel. And he says, I'm a bocha yeshiva, I learned Torah. Bocha yeshiva, 13 shekel. And it was despicable to me. It rubbed me the wrong way. It just didn't feel yashar at all. I said, I didn't say anything. I just paid the full amount. So that's using the keter of Torah, chalaf. So we haven't defined yet what the word chalaf means. We're going to get to in a second, but it means your past. Chalaf, lachlof, to pass by. So that's one interpretation. The other interpretation that Reish Lakish says in the end of Maseches Megillah is that it's not referring to you getting benefit, but rather it's referring to you using Talmidei Chachamim. That someone who is shoneh halachot, someone who has already reached the level they can teach halacha or they can repeat halacha, and then you use them. You say, "Oh, would you mind getting that for me? Could you bring me that? Would you do me a favor?" And you use Talmidei Chachamim. That's also another interpretation of what Hillel was referring to. You're using the crown of Torah, not that you're using your benefit that you've learned Torah, but you're using a Tam Chacham. Okay. Now, I was looking for a pattern here because these seem to be four very disconnected pieces, all said by Hillel, but no seemingly pattern or theme which is linking them all together. So I want to suggest an idea. This is very loosely based on the Maharal's interpretation. He's the one who kind of triggered my thought of connecting them all, but I took a different path, and we're going to see if we can get an understanding. HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings us to this world in order for his Shechina to come down into the world via Am Yisrael, primarily through the mode of Torah, and for us to teach that Torah to other people and bring Shechina, recognition of HaKadosh Baruch Hu into the world. Am zu yatzarti li teilati yesaperu. I created this nation for them to teach my teachings in the world. That's our mission, that's our role, that's what we're doing. Now, I think that this Mishnah is coming to give a stages, the prerequisites and the stages of how we go around doing it. So stage number one is even before we get to Torah, it's the prerequisite. And you couldn't have a person more fitting than Hillel to be teaching this, because Hillel was known to be a great anav. We told the stories about him already, about how people would try and annoy him and he would never get annoyed. He was tremendously humble. So Hillel says, first things first, you have to make sure that you're a kli, that you're receptive to the word of Hashem. Like, I'll just give a mashal. If you have, right, one second, yeah, okay. If you have a kli over here, right, you see my kli? If you have a kli, so it's facing upwards, meaning that any shefa that will come down from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this kli is able to receive it. But once you turn it over, and you're saying, no, I want it just for myself, meaning it's about me, then you're not able to receive Hashem. As opposed to the Kinneret, which is a kli this way and this way. That's fine. You can be a kli both ways. But if you're only a kli that you want to show off and you want your name to go out, you're not going to be receiving the word of Hashem. So before we even get to Torah and how Torah is going to be the method and the mode about how which we're going to teach about Hashem, before we get to that, the prerequisite is it's not about your name. It's about HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name. And therefore the beginning is Nagad Shmei Avad Shmei. The way we interpreted it until now, I'm still holding on to, but I want to give also a new pshat. So the first way we spoke about was Nagad Shmei, that a person who's trying to draw down his own name to make himself famous, Avad Shmei, then he's going to lose his own name. That's the negative side of it. But there's also a positive side of it. A beautiful interpretation. Nagad Shmei, if you wish to draw down the name of Hashem, right? Same words. Nagad Shema. You're drawing down the Shmei, Yehei Shemei Rabbah, the name of Hashem, then Avad Shmei, lose your name. You first have to be humble. It's the same pshat, basically, but it's just the opposite side of it. The negative side is if a person's trying to draw down a name higher than himself, then that won't work. He'll lose even the level that he's on. That was the negative way we explained it until now. Now we're saying your mission, your purpose is Nagad Shmei, to bring down the name of Hashem. Prerequisite is no arrogance, no trying to show off. It's not about you. For you to be a conduit for HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world, you have to be totally hollow. The name of Hashem comes down purely through you, but you don't have any of your own interpretation of how you're going to benefit from coming through you. That's stage number one. Nagad Shmei Avad Shmei, before we even got the Torah. Stage number two, Udelo Mosif Yasef. So going still with the same interpretation we said now, but now we can understand it very clearly. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Elokim Chaim. Our mission in this world is to be bringing down the name of Hashem. So we are like a wellspring, which we have to be filling up from the Makor Chaim. Chazal, the Pasuk in Tehillim says that the name of Hashem is Makor Chaim, the source of life. Meaning if we wish to be receiving from that source of life so that we can be spreading Hashem's name in the world, stage number one is our own learning. Like the Kinneret, it first absorbs everything. But it's something which you can never stop. You can never lose your connection to, because it's the live source of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah. The Torah is our source of being able to bring Hashem into the world. The lo mosif, you can never stop learning. You can never reach a stage ever in life where you say, I've learned enough. The moment you say that break, you make a break and you're not fulfilling devotedly your mission in this world to be drawing down the Shekhinah. You're constantly drawing down, constantly reconnecting your mission to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, if you then keep it for yourself, you're not doing your mission. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you a mission as well, that your Torah that you absorb and you fill yourself up with, the lo mosif, that you never stop. You have to be spreading to others. The flow of Shekhinah that's coming down through you, you have to recognize that you're only a conduit and it has to go through you and go to others. And therefore, odelo yalef, if you're not teaching, then you're boged, you're denying your mission, you're a traitor, chas v'shalom. Kat l'chayev, you're chayev misa. Why? Because you're connected to the source of life, but you're not flowing that source of life into the world. You're not fulfilling mitzvahs in front of other people, teaching Torah to other people. Your whole mission as well as a Jew is to be tehilati yisaperu, telling other people about Gadlus Hashem. And therefore, it's not enough that you are recognizing Gadlus Hashem, which is the first stage of lo mosif. You never stop receiving and recognizing HaKadosh Baruch Hu in your own life, which is stage number one, after you're humble. Stage number one is you're humble. Stage number two is you never stop connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You're always recognizing His hashgacha. You're always learning His Torah. You're always fulfilling His mitzvahs. The lo mosif. Stage number three is you don't hold it to yourself. You don't keep it yourself. The lo yalef. And if you don't stop, if you don't teach it on, you don't pass it on, then it stops there. It's like the Dead Sea. It's going to stop by you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants the Torah to spread. It doesn't say tehilati yitbonenu. It doesn't say that you will contemplate my praise. It says tehilati yisaperu, that has to go on to others. Oh, final stages. After a person has done that, now there's a danger, because you can be humble initially. It's hard to be humble initially as well, but it's relatively easy to be humble initially. But when you get to the stage where after being humble and after filling yourself with Torah and after teaching that Torah to others, then there comes a stage where you think to yourself, I'm something here. Now, I did something valuable. I brought Hashem in the world. And therefore, Magiali, I deserve something. I deserve some payback. Udishtamesh bataga, once you use the crown of Hashem, your whole purpose here is to be an Eved Hashem. And you're using the crown of Hashem, chalaf, they passed you. No, you didn't fulfill your mission, we'll find someone else. And then you get passed from this world. That's what the word chalaf means. You lose your job. Meaning if you got that far, that you are being the one teaching HaKadosh Baruch Hu's words to the world, and then you take credit for it at that point, chalaf, Hashem says, okay, you lost your job, move aside, and you lose it. I'll just finish with one idea. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest expression of what we just said now. Moshe Rabbeinu started by being humble, anav mikol adam. Then he came and he learned Torah Hashem, and then he taught Torah Hashem, and never at any stage did he ever take credit for himself. Taga chalaf, otherwise he would have been passed on. He was never passed on. He never took credit for himself. So Moshe Rabbeinu, in the Torah, you would think he would be called a melech. Essentially, he was a melech. In theory, he had a din of a melech. Someone who would speak out against him was moed b'malchus. But nowhere in the Torah do you see that he's called a melech. Other kings are called melachim later on in Sefer Melachim. But Moshe was never called a melech. Why do we never call him melech? Because he was the ultimate Eved. They calls him an Eved. Now, what's better, to be a melech or an Eved? Is it better to get the title melech, or is it better to get the title Eved? So it depends. If you're talking about a group of people who are all on the same level, one big group, and you're saying, should you rather be an Eved or rather be a melech, then of course a melech is higher than an Eved. Of course a king is higher up than a servant. But if you're talking in one group, and you say, in this group, who's the king, the top one over here? Now, however, there's a totally different group, and the lowest one of that group is connected to, like Mashal Ma'adav. Is it better to be the queen bee, which is the queen, she's the queen bee, but she's of bees, or is it better to be a spokesperson working under Rav Chaim Kanievsky, a shamash of Rav Chaim Kanievsky? So you would say, queen, ma, shamash, he's a shamash? Well, he's subjugate to someone else? Of course, I would rather be a queen bee. That's ridiculous. We're talking about two totally different levels. So Moshe Rabbeinu was never called a king because he never took the taga for himself. He never saw himself as the king over the people. He always saw himself as a servant to Hashem. He was always just the conduit bringing down the Shekhinah. So his title in the Torah is Eved. But he was also a king. Yeah, but he never used the being of a king. He never benefited from anyone in any way. He never looked to benefit or used anyone as a servant in respect to him. So they viewed him as a king, but he didn't view himself as a king in respect to them. He only viewed himself as a servant in respect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's a much higher praise. That's the praise of Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's the message that Hillel's telling us, those 4 stages of bringing Shekhinah down to the world. First stage, you would become a receptive. You recognize that it's all about you receiving Shekhinah in the world. Once you do that, you fill yourself of Torah and you never stop, because if you ever stop, you're stopping your life connection with the source of life. Once you do that, you don't stop by you, but you recognize your mission is Tehilati Yasaperu, Lilmod Almanat Lamed. The Gemara in Sota, you have the obligation to teach others, and you overflow with Hashem's teaching the Shekhinah to the others and spreading the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to other people as well. And then you have to be very careful to ensure that once you've reached that great stage of Gadlus, that you never say, look what I did, because then you become a king and you're taking away HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Malchus. It's a sense of more of Malchus. Rather, all your life, you remain an Eved, otherwise, Chalaf, otherwise you pass. And that's Hillel's message of the 4th stage. Yeshar Koach.